Hello there, everybody, and welcome to another weekly walk. First of all, I want to thank you so much for joining us as we celebrate the holidays. I know we're all quite busy wrapping up presents, traveling, whatever else, but just the fact that you folks are able to join us on these weekly walks every Wednesday really does mean quite a lot to us. Of course, we have one more walk to get through before we wrap up for the year. So let's go ahead and cut to the chase. Today, we're going to be heading down towards what's called the Mount, which today is home to the Central Park Conservancy's composting operations. But historically, the Mount has seen quite a bit of activity for at least hundreds of years. So let's go ahead now and continue on. And of course, we begin right here with the housekeeping. And as you folks know, feel free to use the chat feature on your Zoom control bar to say hello and comment. You can also use the Q&A feature to ask any questions. Joining us on the back end today is Desiree. She'll go ahead and answer any questions you folks might have. And as you folks can see, we've also enabled closed captioning, which you can turn off and on the Zoom control panel. And of course, we'll also be showing historic images from the New York Public Library, the Museum of the City of New York, the Library of Congress, and the Central Park Conservancy. All right, folks, and of course, our mission here at the Conservancy is to preserve and celebrate Central Park as a sanctuary from the pace and pressures of city life, enhancing the enjoyment and well-being of all. So let's begin, as we always do, with the map. So we're going to start off over at the east side of the park at 90th Street. So we're going to go right up the reservoir. We're going to check out East Meadow, and then we'll end things off over at the Mount. Now, we'll start off right here at East 90th, over at what's called Engineers Gate. Now, more so than most other gates in the park, Engineers Gate, I think, really ups the ante in terms of grandiosity. And I think you can really see that here in the artwork. As we head inside, we, of course, are met by the statue of Fred Lebow, who was an immigrant from Romania who went on to found the world-famous New York City Marathon. Now, as we've seen in previous walks, Fred Lebow is the only statue in the park that actually moves. And this happens every year in November during the New York City Marathon. And so from here, we're going to start walking north along the bridle path. Over on the right-hand side, you folks can actually see this very large, massive tree. This is what's called an English oak, and it's one of the oldest in the park. Basically welcomes visitors from, entering in from Fifth Avenue. And just off towards the west, directly across from the English oak tree, we have this monument to a gentleman by the name of John Perroy Mitchell. Now, John Perroy Mitchell was the youngest mayor in New York City's history. At the time when he was first inaugurated, he was actually just 34 years old. Now, he had a hand in constructing the water tunnels that would bring in fresh, clean water to New York City, hence his location right here at the reservoir. Tragically, he died in service in 1918 during World War I when he fell out of his plane during flight training. Now, everything about the memorial is, of course, pretty grand, including this very finely detailed urn, which is one of two. The one that we're looking at right now, this is the southern urn. It's also another urn just off towards the north. And if we continue on with the walk, just directly towards the north, we come to these very stately Yoshino cherry blossom trees. And these trees, of course, they really make this part of the reservoir so famous. Now, these cherry blossoms have been here for more than a century. These were basically gifts from Japan. And you can really see that in their trunks. They're really quite gnarly, how cherry blossom trees actually grow old. They do experience like these very, very thick bark, which really kind of shows itself as they grow older. Now, here are these very same trees in another season. This, of course, is during springtime in April when all these trees are going to be in bloom. These are, of course, going to be incredibly lovely and are indeed a major drawing point during the springtime here in Central Park. Now, just across from the Yoshino cherry trees, we get this nice, lovely turkey oak tree with these leaves still attached. Now, some trees, and you might have actually noticed this around the park, they actually have a tendency to keep their leaves well into winter. Now, there's actually a phenomenon called marcescence. And this is apparently fairly common among oaks, and beeches and some other deciduous trees as well. If we take a look, well, we can see the leaf of the turkey oak tree. It's named for the fact that it almost looks like a very, very small turkey feather. Now, as we continue on up, we get this really excellent view of the reservoir as well as the Upper West Side. The reservoir is, of course, a very popular spot for runners, and that really makes sense with all of its incredible, gorgeous views of the city all around us. Now, some of the more famous runners here would include Bill Clinton and, of course, Jackie Kennedy Onassis, who the water body is named after, as well as many, many, many hundreds, if not thousands, of prime runners coming to Central Park and New York City to use up the reservoir. All righty, folks, and continuing north along the bridle path, we're going to go ahead and move on with our walk. So just right around the corner, we come to this very large and massive London plane. So this is the second big tree or great tree on our tour. This, of course, is just along the northern edges of the reservoir, and the landscape here is going to be dominated by this tree. It is a well-beloved legend here in the city due to its very, very large size. Now, this particular London plane stands at just under 100 feet tall with a diameter of more than 6 feet. So it really gives you a sense of just how massive these trees can be out in the wild. This particular London plane most likely was first planted either just before the construction of the park or right around the construction of the park in the early 1860s. And let's go ahead and continue north through the East Meadow, and we're going to examine the landscape here for a little bit. Of course, we're going to make our way past this fence, hiding the 97th Street Transverse Road away from view. Of course, if you folks have ever taken a peek at these transverse roads through these fences or whatever else, you can get glimpses of the passing street traffic below. And this is, I think, especially true in wintertime when the plantings along the road are a little bit more sparse. Now, here's an image from the nearby 86th Street Transverse from back in the 1930s. Now, this was actually right around the time that the city was tearing down all of its old trolley tracks, and a few lines actually went right through Central Park along the transverse roads. Now, I'm always quite fascinated with the photos of the evolving city. It's images like these that I think really give you an appreciation for the changes throughout these centuries. All righty, and continuing on, as you folks can see, we are making our way through East Meadow. Now, Central Park is, of course, famous for its rocky outcrops of Manhattan schist. And part of that reason is due to the incredible geologic forces that have taken place here. So these striations on the rock, for example, these were created tens of thousands of years ago as massive ice sheets scraped right through the landscape. And when the park was being built up in the 1850s and 1860s, Calvert Vaux and Frederick Law Olmsted, they actually decided to use these natural wonders to their advantage and essentially incorporate them into the park design itself. And nearby from the rock outcrop, we can find this tree. It's called a Norway spruce. Now, as the name might suggest, the Norway spruce isn't originally native to North America, but it is a very popular evergreen tree to plant in many parks and landscapes, especially right around this time of the year. And that's because it's often used for Christmas trees. So take the world famous Rockefeller Center tree over in Midtown, for example, which is the one of the most famous of all the Christmas trees around the planet. And of course, it's a holiday staple here in New York City since 1931. Since the 1970s, Norway spruce has always been used as the tree to plant or to put up in Rockefeller Center. Usually they choose a nice tall specimen from right around the northeast of the United States. And of course, they can get pretty tall, upwards of 70 up to 90, sometimes close to 100 feet. Now, this year we have a Norway spruce that's roughly about 82 feet high. And it was actually just found right outside of the bucolic shores of Lake George in upstate New York. And of course, taking a much closer peek at the branches of the Norway spruce, we can see that the tree actually has these things called whorled needles. World needles basically grow from all around the sides of the branch, which kind of gives it that classic Christmas tree look to it that's perfect for hanging up ornaments, lights, and other decorations. All right, so let's move on, and we're going to take the pathway on the center towards the north. And right around the corner, we can find another evergreen tree species that's sometimes used during the holidays. This is something called the eastern white pine. These are often called the monarchs of the forest, and with good reason. They can regularly get up to more than 130 feet tall. By the way, the angle that we're looking at these pine trees from, I think really makes them look more like big giant masts on a sailing ship. And of course, that's because they were actually used for many, many hundreds of years as actual masts. So here, for example, is the historic ship USS Constitution. And the Constitution actually had these masts that were crafted out of white pine, with the main mast itself being more than 220 feet tall, which I think really is kind of incredible. So take a look at the image of the Constitution again, and then take a look at these eastern white pines. They really are truly massive, giving them the name monarchs of the forest. All right, folks, and speaking of old and stately trees, why don't we go ahead now and conduct our poll of the day. So let me go ahead and share the poll right now. So right now, I wanted to ask you folks, do you have a favorite great tree in Central Park? So far on our walk, we've taken a look at quite a few older and legendary trees, such as the London plane and the English elm out on the reservoir. All these are, of course, considered great trees, which basically mean that they've been around for a long time and have been a favorite of generations of New Yorkers. So I'm going to let you folks vote on that right now. Give you folks a few more seconds, and we can find out which great tree is everyone's favorite. Of course, if you have another great tree that isn't listed on the list, you can always write it down on the chat below. All right, so let's go ahead and end off this poll right now. Looks like most of us have voted. So let's go ahead and share these results. So no surprise here. One of our favorite trees is always going to be the cherry blossoms of the reservoir. Those have been around for more than 100 years, and they were a gift from the nation of Japan. Coming in at a very, very close second is going to be the American elms, followed by other types of individual tree species, including the London plane at 96, the Tupelo over at the Ramble, as well as the English elm that we passed by at 90th Street. So all of which, of course, are really quite stunning and very, very pretty to look at. So let's go ahead and stop sharing the poll and continue on with our walk. So from here, we're going to go ahead and move on over on the pathway. That's gonna take us over towards the main drive. So why don't we go ahead and follow that pathway right now? And as we walk along the road, we pass by this willow oak tree. This willow oak, of course, still has its leaves intact. This, as we've seen, is an example of the phenomenon known as marcescence, and it's pretty common among oak trees. The willow oak's leaves have this very long, slender shape to it, giving it its name, since it looks much more like a willow leaf than maybe, say, an actual oak leaf. All right, so we're now approaching the last few stops on our walk. So we're going to end off the walk over at the mount. And further up the drive, we arrive on this rocky hill just off towards the east. Of course, we're greeted by the sign welcoming us to the mount. This is, of course, home to the Central Park Conservancy's composting operations. So here in the mount, you're going to see things like these large, massive metal containers full of compost. Now, the mount isn't necessarily the prettiest section in the park to explore. It basically just looks like a massive construction site, but it is in fact quite essential and important for a more sustainable landscape. So up here, you're going to find things like containers full of leaf compost, especially right after autumn when we have just a glut of all these leaf litter all around the park. And usually when we bring in the compost, it's going to be a mix of all sorts of plant and organic matter taken from various different points in the park. So here, for example, you can prominently see these ginkgo leaves with their very, very distinct fan shape, as well as the golden yellow foliage. Plus, you might also be able to see a few other types of leaves as well. I can definitely see a few red oaks or pin oaks down here at the bottom. Over on the left-hand side, we can see conifer needles, quite possibly a bald cypress needle. So there's definitely a big or great mix of all of these different trees and leaf litter in this compost. During the composting process, bacteria and other microorganisms basically break down organic matter, such as these leaves, and over time, they help turn the waste material into soil that's jam-packed with nutrients. You'll also find piles of branches and tree trunks, often from a tree called black locust, which is the rot-resistant wood that's so often used for crafting rustic bridges, benches, and shelters here in the park. And now here's, I think, a pretty awesome looking machine that you might see every once in a while up here at the mount. This is what's called an industrial trommel. And it basically sifts through all the compost to separate all the different sized materials. Now, if we make our way down along the south side of the hill, you might see the stone wall that's actually visible from the lawn itself. This is actually the remains of a 19th century building that once occupied the top of the mount. For about a century, since the mid-1700s, the mount was the site of a tavern owned by a local family called the McGoverns. Beginning in the 1840s, the land itself, including the structures, it was all bought out by the Sisters of Charity of Mount St. Vincent, who then operated a convent for nuns until the city came in and took over the land for Central Park. The illustration in front of us, by the way, is from 1861, when it was still in use as an office space and living quarters for Frederick Law Olmsted, who actually lived here briefly as he oversaw the park's construction. The mount was also used as a museum as well, and here you'd find sculptures and artifacts from the park throughout the decades. This photograph is going to be from 1900, by the way. 15 years later, by World War I, the structure would then be torn down, but the wall supporting it would remain as essentially ruins for park visitors to explore. Alrighty, folks. So we're going to go ahead and wrap things up right here for the day here at the mount. Again, I want to thank you all so much for joining us on this weekly walk. Now, don't forget to check out some of our other upcoming guided tours, which includes our brand new Winter Wonderland tour. You can check that out in the links in the chat. Desiree will put that in the chat section, but definitely do check it out. It is a wonderful and amazing tour. And of course, you also get a nice free hot beverage with the Winter Wonderland tour. So you can choose from hot coffee, tea, hot chocolate, whatever else. All right, folks. And of course, thank you all so much for joining us from the Central Park Conservancy. Now, don't forget to check us out on all of our social media channels. You can check us out on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and YouTube. You can use the hashtag, or you can use the handle at Central Park NYC when getting in touch with us. But from all of us here at the Central Park Conservancy, thank you all so much, folks, from the bottom of my heart. Happy holidays and have a happy new year. Take care, folks.